Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'm very glad to speak on this bill, which establishes one of the key measures being put in place by the Albanese Labor government to address the sharp challenges in housing access and affordability in Australia. It's a big problem. We understand that. We're not turning away from it. We are taking it on. And in the first 18 months of this government, we've put in place a significant package of measures to address what was neglected for the previous decade in relation to access to safe and affordable housing. This is one of those measures, the Help to Buy bill, and we're putting it in place along with all the other measures, some of which I'll touch on in a bit, because we know that safe, secure and affordable housing is literally the foundation upon which our well-being depends. And as I've said before, the starkest measures of deprivation anywhere in the world, including in Australia, relate to the absence of safe and secure housing, which means the inability to live and sleep warmly and in peace. It means the lack of a place where you can prepare food and eat properly, the lack of a home base from which people can go to work and children can go off to school, a home base to which people can return to and rest and be supported in the company of their family and housemates. Without safe and affordable housing, everything else in life is contingent and at risk. Health, education, employment, social inclusion, the opportunity to breathe out, to think about the future, to play, to love and to be loved. And that's why, Deputy Speaker, safe and affordable housing is rightly considered a basic human right. As I say, it is literally the steady ground under your feet. It is literally the roof over your head, and that's why it's been a high priority and a major focus for the Albanese government in our first term. It's why it was such a big part of our first full budget in May last year, and it needed to be, because as I said, as in so many areas of Australian life, we're stepping back in. The Labor federal government, the Albanese federal government, is stepping back in to an area that was woefully neglected for the 9 years, the 3 terms of government before that. A decade, in many cases, of nothing, and in some cases of worse than nothing. Not just neglect, but active undermining of the capacity for Australians to access safe and affordable housing. So in that cause, we are delivering the Help to Buy scheme, part of a wider package, but an important measure in itself. And the concept's very simple. The Albanese government, in partnership with state and territory governments, is going to assist low-income Australians to own a home by sharing the investment in that home with them. We know that there are significant barriers to home ownership, especially for younger and low-income Australians. We know saving a deposit is hard when there are so many other cost pressures. And we know getting a loan is not easy. And this scheme will assist by allowing government to take a share in the purchase of a home, thereby alleviating what is otherwise an obstacle that many Australians can't overcome. And the fact is, Deputy Speaker, that Western Australians don't need any convincing and probably don't need much explanation about the benefits and the value of shared equity schemes, because we've seen an approach of that kind in WA. We've seen how it assists people into housing and boosts home ownership, particularly for people who find that challenging, because we've had the Key Start shared equity program operating in WA since it was created by the doubting Western Australian Labor government back in 1989. And that's significant for me. I actually remember that. 1989 was my last year of high school, and my life up to that point involved a relative insecurity of housing. I was talking to my brother and sister the other day, just reflecting on the fact that my last 4 years of high school, where I attended Swanbourne High School, we moved 5 times. We lived in 5 different houses in those 4 years. After my parents parted ways when I was young, my parents never owned a house again, and until after my father's parents died and he was able to purchase a home. My mum doesn't own a house to this day. So we were a renting household, a renting single-parent household, and that's just how it was in Fremantle at the time, which was a considerably more affordable place than it is now. But it sort of amazes me in terms of the difference that my kids have experienced, to reflect on what that was like, to think that I lived in 5 different premises just over those last 4 years of high school. But Key Start has been a remarkable program in WA. As I say, started in 1989. It's helped more than 120,000 Western Australians get into their own home through nearly 80,000 separate home loans over that period, accounting for $18.3 billion in total loan funding. 3/4 of those loans went to people who were previously renting. So 75% of people who benefited from a Key Start loan had been renting. Some of the other quarter probably weren't even renting, in as much as they were probably still living with family or in some other kind of informal housing arrangement. 73% of the loans under the Key Start program in the 35 years that it's been in operation were made to people between the ages of 20 and 40. So you can see that nearly 3/4 of those loans go to people in that younger age bracket, of course, where we know people face those kinds of challenges. And there's just no doubt that shared equity programs work. And I'm going to quote something that Jessica Shaw, the Western Australian Labor State member for Swan Hills, said about Key Start, because it can't really be said better. And I quote, "In Key Start, the state has a commercially sustainable, low deposit but not high risk lending business that sets people on the path to financial sustainability." And that's absolutely right. So it's fantastic that the Albanese Labor government is now creating, through this bill, a similar shared equity help to buy opportunity that certainly in my state will amplify what's already been delivered through Key Start. As I've said, Deputy Speaker, it's an important measure. It's far from being the only thing that we've done in the first 18 months of this government. We created the Housing Australia Future Fund with some significant resistance from other parts of the parliament, unfortunately, both the Coalition and the Greens, as it turns out, strangely enough. $10 billion through the Housing Australia Future Fund. It will create 40,000 dwellings over 5 years, with 4,000 of those dedicated to supporting women and children fleeing domestic violence. I don't think anyone would argue that we don't need more of that kind of measure. The Social Housing Accelerator, Deputy Speaker, $2 billion to partner with states and territories in creating new or refurbished social housing dwellings. The Home Guarantee Scheme. That scheme was stood up pretty quickly. It's already helped more than 67,000 people into home ownership since we were elected in May 2022. 67,000 people, including 9,000 in rural and regional Australia through the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee. And of course, as part of our focus on cost of living, which was the highest priority focus of our first full budget, we delivered the largest increase to Commonwealth rent assistance that has been provided in 30 years. So we know that housing is a significant cost pressure, and as I've said, it's really the principal cost pressure on any Australian household. And we've done a number of things that are specific to housing, but we've done things that also go to cost of living more broadly, noting that that actually makes a difference when it comes to people's capacity to afford safe and secure housing. But that increase to Commonwealth rent assistance, as we discuss a bill that is about getting people into home ownership, we of course know that people who aren't able to be in a position to buy at this stage are essentially facing the rental market, and the rental market is tough. And that's why we're working with the states on the rules that help regulate rental tenancies so that people can receive fair treatment, can ensure that they're not facing unconscionable rent increases that pile up one after the other, that can't face other kinds of sharp dealing when it comes to trying to find a place to rent on a fair basis. But to the extent that the Commonwealth can make a direct difference to the capacity of people to be able to afford rental premises, we are doing that, as I say, the largest increase to Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years. We also introduced or boosted the National Housing Infrastructure Facility, and that's significant because last year when the Cabinet came to Western Australia, as the Prime Minister has committed to doing, making sure that the Cabinet and key ministers spend time in WA following his commitment to be in the West as often as he can be. There was an announcement by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Housing with their Western Australian counterparts of an $88 million investment through the National Housing Infrastructure Facility for a new social and affordable housing project in central Perth. It's being undertaken in cooperation with the Cook WA Labor government. They are putting in about $45 million. It will create 200 new dwellings, including 66 social housing apartments and 44 affordable rental homes. But, Deputy Speaker, as we make this change, which I hope is supported across the board, it's worth remembering the scale of the challenge, not just in the way that it is experienced by people who are struggling to buy or people who are struggling to rent. The scale of the challenge before us is partly created by relatively short and medium-term circumstances, but the greatest contributor to it is that longer-term pattern of neglect. I said before that you could look at the things that the coalition did and didn't do. You can call it neglect. You can say that it's a failure of omission, in as much as a lot of the measures that the Rudd and Gillard government put in place. Prime Minister Rudd had his own experience of housing insecurity and was therefore very committed to introducing a range of programs at the Commonwealth level that would address that. It wasn't just that the incoming Abbott government then said, well, we'll take our hands off the wheel, there's nothing more to do here. There were actually a series of steps that the former government took that made things worse. They got rid of the Housing Help for Seniors pilot. Older Australians who are least able to increase their income and who frankly need safe and secure housing as much as anyone, benefited from the Housing Help for Seniors pilot. Well, that got the chop under the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government. They tried to cut funding to community legal centres. Mercifully, that was resisted. I mean, when you think about the work that community legal centres do in terms of tenancy support and advice, just how critical it is when people who are possibly facing eviction, people who are possibly finding themselves homeless are able to get that expert legal assistance and advice. Well, the coalition government wanted to cut the knees out from under community legal centres, which would certainly have not just had acute harmful impacts on individuals, but would have pushed much greater costs onto every other part of the system, because you know that when you don't prevent a person from being in crisis, that the consequences after that, when they've been evicted, end up being much more costly than if they could have stayed in their home in the first place. The coalition government wasn't finished there. They defunded the homelessness and community housing peak bodies. They thought, well, we don't need peak bodies who are in the game of helping to give advice on policy, helping to represent some of the most marginalised and disadvantaged Australians. We'll stop supporting the vital work that they do. They closed the National Rental Affordability Scheme, a key policy under the Rudd-Gillard government, and they abolished the National Housing Supply Council. So the one thing that those opposite will say is, don't worry about anything else, it's all about supply. Take the ropes off the animal spirits in the economy, blah, 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 and it'll all take care of itself. Well, they abolished the National Housing Supply Council, so the body that was put in place to help coordinate increases in supply, encourage local governments to look at their planning conditions, encourage state and territory governments to take the brakes off. That body, which was doing good work, got abolished by those opposite. So, Deputy Speaker, we don't accept the circumstances that face people in Australia doing it tough when it comes to achieving what should be a basic human right: safe, secure and affordable housing, the foundation of everything. We don't accept that. We are stepping back into that space in short order. The Minister for Housing has introduced a comprehensive range of measures and funding, because the neglect of the last 10 years can't be allowed to continue. The Commonwealth has a role to help support housing options for all Australians, but particularly for those fleeing domestic violence, for younger, low-income, older, poorer Australians. This Help to Buy bill is one of those measures, along with a whole range of things that we're doing after a decade of neglect.